Welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. We've got a lot to go over today, so let's get started. And I want to start with something new. That's what I call a quick drive-by commentary on news headlines. And to start with, the headline, we're going to start with Trump-backed Paxton in the Texas Senate race defeats incumbent John Cornyn in Texas landslide. Well, you bet it was a landslide, and by 28 points, but yet the polls were telling you just before the election that was only 1 or 2 points. What's even more amazing is that Paxton raised less than $10 million on his race, and the incumbent Cornyn spent over $100 million, and a lot of that came from the Republican Senatorial Fund, and this is exactly why I never contribute to that fund. You have a bunch of incumbent and establishment people that are always protecting their rears and spending donor monies not in the best interest of the Republican Party, but their own interest. My recommendation is that if you're going to make a contribution, and you do need to make it to the Republican candidate directly. Now, moving on, here's a loss that really made me happy, and that was the defeat of that cane-wielding Representative Al Green, the black representative from Texas who carried the cane and always interrupted Trump's State of the Union speeches. In the last 2 states of the Union, this guy had to be escorted out of the chambers. He's a black, bitter racist that loved to call everybody else a racist. And I'm glad to see him gone. Too bad he's going to get his pension for all the harm he's caused. Now, here's another one for you. Joe Biden has sued the Trump Department of Justice to prevent the release of recordings of Biden with his biographer. Well, my message to Biden is, hey, we already know you're a mentally deranged person, so there's nothing to surprise us. There's nothing to hide, but only to confirm what everybody else already knew and to keep you and Jill from lying about it and rewriting history. Now, here's a good one for you. The Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, who is so feminine that with a wig he could pass for a woman, well, maybe an ugly one, but it would be in keeping with all he says, does, and supports. Frey decided to honor that repeat criminal offender George Floyd on Memorial Day. But then when you think about it, even as bad as George Floyd was, he was still more of a man than Mayor Frey. If you don't know anything about this mayor, you ought to look it up. He's another suicidal Jew who supports everything that will kill them and the country as well. He's so bad that if I had the power, he would be one of the first people I would denaturalize. He's truly a disgusting example of a man, but then it also speaks to the character of the people in Minneapolis and the Democrat Party. Now, here's one for you that you've heard many times before, and that is the Death to America chant from the Iranian leaders and mullahs. The so-called supreme leader is derisively and correctly called the gay Ayatollah, and that is not just a passing slur. Get this, he warned that U.S. forces won't have a safe haven if they attack Iran again. Oh, really? Well, I'm sure that really just sends chills down your spine. You know, guys like that are always displaying a false machismo, and it speaks more to their lack of an endowment, and I'm not talking about the kind in a bank. It has more to do with the compensating kind that old men driving around in Corvettes have. Well, here we go again with Democrat Senator Murphy from Connecticut, who said that the Iran war should end now at any cost. Yeah, that's what he said, at any cost. This guy is so anti-American that he's going to get a hernia trying to suppress his communist roots. But then coming from a majority atheist state like Connecticut, what would you expect? This guy's history is enough for a treason charge and indictment. He's another one of these girly men who threaten his country and threaten us all. Well, let's move on to Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. And he's back in the news again, bloviating that Trump is the most corrupt president in American history. You know, people like this just make me sick and when they say things like this. But they're speaking too simple-minded. Booker has visions of grandeur and has been nicknamed Spartacus. And he, I think, even named himself that, as if he really ever had what it takes to be a real man and a real leader. He sees himself as a Spartacus, but always covering over his deficiencies with his obstreperous and bombastic yelling and screaming. As part of the communist crowd, he manufactures lies and deception by the truckload. Of course, he does that to distract from his lies, leftist radicalism, and the deficient knowledge of anything he's talking about. But then again, he comes from New Jersey, the so-called Garden State, and I can assure you, having traveled through New Jersey, it's anything but a garden. Then on Thursday on CNN, the lead communist Democrat Senator Booker said President Donald Trump's immigration enforcement was chaotic, cruel, and corruption. However, Booker was delighted with the chaos that President Biden created, allowing over 10 million illegals and criminals and terrorists to cross the border. But of course, back then, under Biden, Booker never complained about the chaos because the illegals were simple people easily manipulated and deceived by the Democrats like him to vote for them. The Democrats are glad to sell out the country in order to stay in power. Well, let's go back and talk a little bit about the recent elections where Trump is 100% in his endorsements winning elections. He's got a perfect score with regard to the Senate, House, and governorships. He's purging the Republican Party of RINOs, which means Republicans in name only. Tillis of North Carolina is retiring, and good riddance to him, but he was forced into retirement. The conservatives and Republicans in North Carolina were going to give him the boot anyway, according to the polls. He was and is a real jerk. Then we got rid of Cassidy in Louisiana, and Cornyn in Texas, and 5 Indiana state senators are all gone, all cowards who would not do anything with regards to doing redistricting in Indiana. So Trump is 9 for 9 on the Senate races, 102 for 102 on the House races, and 8 for 8 in the governorships. The next target needs to be the Republican leader of the Senate in South Carolina who blocked redistricting, and his excuse was absolutely disgusting. Well, we have to have fairness. Well, you jerk, what about the 9 states in the Northeast where there is 0 Republican representation? Folks, you can't defeat the communist resurgence in this country via the Democrat Party. They are the communists. If you don't have strong and brave leaders in the Republican Party, defeat is assured. I'm tired of all these cowards that are in positions of power within the Republican Party that are too cowardly to fight. You know, there used to be a game called Up Pops the Weasel. Well, this is a weasel that I wish I could push back into the box again. On Wednesday's CNN Central, Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat in Massachusetts, said that Iran is under some economic pressure right now, but we've got to cut our losses and go home. Yeah. How weaselly is that, to cut and run, you coward? Have you ever known anything good to come out of Massachusetts? Amazing. Now, in fact, that's the state where the women have more testosterone than the men. Here's a great study by Liam DeBoer, who reveals in one of his lectures, Liam states that a controversial but likely claim is that the general physical and psychological weakening of society, particularly among men, is contributing to our growing inability to agree on basic truths. One study explored a simple question: how do men behave when they can lie for money with no risk of being caught? Now, participants were either given testosterone or a placebo, and then asked to privately report the result of a die roll. The higher the number that they claimed, the more money they received. There was no oversight and no penalty for dishonesty. Now, the men who received the testosterone were significantly less likely to lie, not because they were monitored or threatened with punishment, but because even in complete privacy, they appeared less willing to trade honesty for easy gain. The researchers suggested that testosterone may strengthen an internal restraint. The hormone so often blamed for aggression may in fact reinforce our reluctance to secure small rewards through self-degrading behavior. Yet, beyond any single study is a deeper and older question. How do people even decide what is true? We often assume that rationality governs belief, but nature repeatedly shows a different pattern. Weaker entities, that's people, form coalitions to shield themselves from stronger ones. Applied socially, it follows that weaker individuals may lie not only for material gain, but for social survival, approval over truth. Instead of asking, is this true, a weak person may instinctively ask, will I be safe if I believe this? When internal strength erodes, external consensus fills the void. Truth becomes something to be checked against the group rather than discovered through confrontation with reality. From this emerges a more serious understanding of strength. It is not merely the ability to lift heavy objects, but the capacity to withstand pressure without surrendering internal coherence. As societies grow weaker, it would appear self-evident that they do not become kinder or fairer. They become more reliant on narrative control in manufactured agreement. Through this lens, much of the modern world begins to make more sense. Now, here's the problem in society today. Atheism, heresies, false teachers, apostates, but in just simple terms, good men doing nothing, and sanctimonious Christians who sit out the political war against evil. We have become inverted. We treat the lie with compassion and the truth by naming it a phobia. Oh, what a shock it will be for a lot of self-proclaiming Christians when they are confronted on that day with Matthew 7:22-23. And for those self-assured and falsely assured Christians, when they hear Christ say, I never knew you. And your stupidity will not be a winning defense, folks. Now, moving on, when you look at these male representatives in Congress, particularly from the Northeast, they look and act as if they were still suckling on their mother's tit. They are so dysfunctional that they can't even pull off a good lie. They are clueless of how ridiculous they look and sound. But they are a wretched and evil group that will destroy society unless they are removed from office. Their platforms are dangerous because they use them to influence other weak-minded people, and there are a lot of them. These representatives are rarely held to account. But let me not stray too far from the point that weak men who have been made via the demonic feminist movement are causing the chaos and placing us all in danger, and we and our nation in danger. So quickly here, before I move on to another topic, when you start connecting the dots, the feminization of men, making them cowardly weaklings, are creating a vacuum into which the demonic Islamic ideology will fill the void, and under Sharia law, women will be pushed back into the bedroom and the kitchen barefoot and wearing burqas. There is a natural end to the consequences for them that reaches all the way back, folks, to the curse in the Garden of Eden. And that is the woman's envy for the man's position. They will get exactly what they don't want, and that will be their just punishment. Now, if you've ever wondered why there is such an attraction to President Trump by both men and women, it's because he's a real man, and he faces reality. Many cognitively functioning women want a real man, and to find that, they're going to find it within conservative circles. We have heard complaints of late by liberal women who can't seem to find a real man that is not a conservative. Imagine that. Liberal, manly, masculine men don't exist. Thus, when we look at the male representatives from the Northeast, they are all simps, which is a word that means a modern evolution of simpleton, a term historically used to describe a foolish or gullible person. It is also slang for someone like a typical male who is overly submissive or fawning in his devotion to someone else. And in our modern context, it would be his narcissistic self and the women from whom he wants their votes in order to stay in power. This falls perfectly in line with the study that Lim DeBoer referenced and the lies that flow from Democrats like a raging waterfall. In their desperate attempt to secure themselves, they work their way into power and influence, destroying all the country in the process. This goes back to my earlier podcast on ponerology, where psychotics seem to migrate to these positions, all because good men do nothing. And the ignorance that produces this, and from which we suffer, is selected. We select this, folks. Now, you must keep your eyes on Representative Moulton and Chris Murphy. There are more than just one of them. I call them the Moultons and the Murphys of the Northeast. They are dangerous and so pathological that they will destroy their country and yours just to prop up their own low T condition. That means low, if not non-existent, testosterone that occurred in their feminization process. Well, here's another example of what Democrats offer you. And I will say it again, we are already in a Civil War 2.0, and if you don't see the Democrat Party as an existential threat and enemy of America, then you are going to lose. Over the last couple of years, I've given you dozens and dozens of examples of how the Democrats are intentionally undermining the country, all the while they lie to you that they are protecting democracy. You know it's not true. The reason they keep trying to take your guns away is that the time may not be that far off in the future where you will need them to defend yourself from a criminally leftist government. Forgive the redundancy here regarding the term criminal left, as the left is really synonymous with being criminal. Nevertheless, here's one more sickening example of what the Democrats offer you and how the Christian church has failed. The Texas church, where Democrat Senate candidate for Texas, James Talerico, delivered radical sermons and pushed this radical gender ideology on children with books filled with basically sexually explicit content and transgender ideology. It came from the Presbyterian church down there in Austin. Talerico attends that church in Austin. He attends St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, about which I have exposed the heresies of the pastor there, Jim Rigby. At his church, children have access to libraries filled with banned books that promote ideas rejected by Christians. These books contain descriptions of anal rape and incest and oral sex, as the Daily Wire has described it. St. Andrew's catalog includes books like Gender Queer with illustrations. Then there is the book titled This Book is Gay, discussing gay sex. And then there is The Courage to be Queer, where the author claims that God is queer. This is in a church, folks. The silence of churches around the country should be screaming for the ouster of this minister, if not his excommunication. There needs to be a tsunami of condemnation, not only for Talerico, but what that minister Rigby is telling in his congregation there in Austin, Texas. Talerico wants to take his perversity learned from this church into the U.S. Senate. The Republican nominee, Ken Paxton, referred to Talerico as both six-gender Jimmy and James Talerico. These are all relevant ad hominems because Talerico is on video claiming that there are six genders, but is now trying to back away from that. Well, here's a little appetizers of what Talerico believes. First of all, he says there are more than two biological sexes. In fact, he says there are six genders. Secondly, he says that God is non-binary, and the church he attends has books in it saying that God is queer. Then he says he loves transgender children. Folks, a child is a child because they don't know who or what they are or want. The human brain is not fully developed until the age of 25. Talerico, in one of his campaigns, said that the campaign had become a non-meat campaign and said that they would only serve vegan food. This guy is a super weirdo, folks. He also said that he had to come to terms with his whiteness. And let's not forget that he missed 800 votes while serving in the Texas legislature. It just keeps getting better as he believes that our southern border should be like a front porch with a welcome mat on it. And as John Nolte put it so well, Talerico is an actor and a miscast one at that. His aides have given him this role where he's supposed to convince a crowd of Texans that he's a meat-eating, girlfriend-banging, God-fearing Christian man when he doesn't have the presence to pull it off or the brains to sail through all those sweet softball-tossed CBS News questions. Nothing is more off-putting than a shamelessly transparent phony. And that's exactly what Talerico is. But that's also what you get from the Democrat Party. Now, here's the problem. The wicked in this country and the forces trying to destroy it, guess what they've done? They have already donated over $40 million to Talerico's campaign. Imagine that. That's the kind of thing that we're facing in this country and the forces and the money behind evil. More and more is coming out daily on this radical and pervert. He believes essentially that God is gay, and in a recent gotcha question, they asked him about his singleness and if he has a girlfriend. Talerico started fumbling around, and you could tell he was uncomfortable and trying to figure out a lie, so he made up an imaginary girlfriend. Folks, if Talerico has a girlfriend, I bet you anything, a T-bone steak to a hamburger, that the girlfriend has testicles. Now, let's not forget what's going on in Maine, and that is candidate Graham Platner. He's a guy that is an admitted communist and has a Nazi tattoo and loves to masturbate in porta potties because he says he is turned on by the smell of the blue water and the graffiti of male genitalia on the walls. You know, sometimes it is difficult to do this podcast when you have to report all the seedy and disgusting things going on because so many are willingly and disgustingly ignorant of the dangers confronting their country. If you don't get into the seedy weeds sometimes on this stuff, people will just find a way to justify everything unless you get explicit to the point of where you just want to vomit. That is what we have become in this country. Let's look at the 14 enumerated scandalous things that are attributable to this Platner guy in Maine. And according to John Nolte, he wore the Nazi SS tattoo for 18 years, has an account on alleged predatory sex site, and he's married. He has explicit sexting with half a dozen women in 2023, and at a time he's married, and not that that's an excuse. And he's disparaged all black people as a population that doesn't tip. He blames bisexual assault victims for being sexually assaulted. He has smeared rural Maine population as racist. Anti-gay post on Reddit, promoted an alleged Holocaust denier on social media, bragged about masturbating again in the porta potties, and mocked a Purple Heart recipient as a dumb MFer who didn't deserve to live. Folks, this is a guy that's running for Senate from Maine, and of course he's a Democrat. He encouraged military contractors to bang hookers in Thailand and called the Virgin Mary a shank. He's had a DUI, appeared on anti-Semite podcast who say that the Jews killed Kennedy. This is what the Democrat Party attracts. How can you have anything in common with any Democrat? I don't care whether it's your friend, your family, or anyone running for office in the Democrat Party. You just can't coexist with these people. Anyway, it has now been revealed that in his short 3-year marriage, Platner has been having all these bizarre things going on. He's been in therapy, not just for his marriage, but for a slew of other mental issues. This is, again, just another example of what you get with a Democrat. Now let's move on to another matter here, and this kind of strikes close to home, and you'll see in just a minute, but now we have Representative Ro Khanna of California is coming to Platner's aid. He's a very rich leftist communist, but for my friends in the 4th District of Kentucky, let's not forget that Thomas Massie was good buddies with Khanna. All the more reason it is good that we got rid of Massie. The company he kept was left coast lefties or delusional libertarians. Now, how much longer are we going to tolerate this insanity? It's not just in this country, but around the world. Already in Canada, if you complain about the government, talk about the Bible, or complain about the perversity of the people like I have just exposed to you, you'll get arrested and locked up. And if you don't start doing something soon, this civil war is going to get hot, and you don't want that. Well, as you've heard me say before, I'm an equal opportunity criticizer, and I don't spare Republicans either. We saw Senator Cornyn of Texas was humiliated in the recent election, the primary election, where he was beaten by 28 points by Paxton after being in the Senate for 40 years. And during that period of time, he grew in office, and he loved the esteem, the glory, the accolades he got. He became pompous, and like Cassidy in Louisiana, and we can't forget Tillis of North Carolina, who knew he was on the chopping block, so he decided not to run for re-election. All these guys like Massie in Kentucky are so self-righteous, believing in their own press and betraying their voters. I have a list of other cowards in the Republican Party that I want to give the boot, but that's for another podcast, and so stay tuned for that. Well, before we end this segment, let's squeeze in a few more headlines to drive home the point that the left's civil war is against America and is still underway, and normal Americans need to enlist in the fight against them. The best ammo for this is to take away their money and their platform, and you do that with devastating and demeaning humor. You delegitimize them as the fools they are, boycott them and those who sponsor them, and let it be widely known. You need to talk it up with your neighbors, your friends, and your family. Even if it doesn't change their behavior, at least it makes them ashamed to even admit what they are supporting. Here is an example of what has to be done to defeat this evil threat in this country. In the primary election where Thomas Massie lost, his challenger knocked on 125,000 doors, among other things, particularly educating the Trump supporters as to how Massie had opposed the president on some of the most important legislation. We can no longer assume. We have to investigate and educate, and this is how you initially win this fight in this war. Now, here's a guy, Bruce Springsteen, now a billionaire, who I never liked nor listened to nor thought was that good. He uses his stage to smear Trump as a racist and treasonous. Can you imagine that you would pay for a concert to listen to this guy who knows nothing? Help make it a career-ending conduct for those in the entertainment industry to use their platform to shove their leftist ideals upon the youth. We are in a war of words right now, but it will turn violent as the left gets more frantic. We have already seen that in many cities around the country. Don't wait. So, thank you for joining us. I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.